Every dollar in your wallet is a lie, not a metaphor, not an exaggeration, a literal, provable lie. That bill in your pocket wasn't created by the government. It was created by a private bank out of thin air and loaned into existence with interest attached. Every single dollar is born as debt that can never be fully repaid. Think about that. The money you work 40 hours a week to earn was conjured from nothing by someone who never broke a sweat. And here's what makes it a scam. The interest you owe on that money, it was never created. There's always more debt in the system than money to pay it off. Always. Debt is the product. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is how central banking works. It's written in their own documents, taught in their own universities, and exposed by their own former insiders. Today, I'm going to walk you through the entire machine, piece by piece, and show you why the monetary system you trust with your life was designed to transfer your wealth to someone else. And by the end, you'll understand why they never taught you this in school. Money from nothing. Let's start with the most basic question nobody asks. Where does money come from? Most people assume the government prints it. That's what they taught us. But that's not how it works, not even close. When a commercial bank gives you a mortgage, it doesn't lend you money from its vault. It doesn't take someone else's savings and hand them to you. It literally types numbers into a computer screen and creates brand new money. The process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled. This is called fractional reserve banking. For every dollar a bank holds in reserves, it can lend out 10, 20, sometimes $30 that didn't exist before. The Bank of England itself published a paper in 2014 confirming this. Their exact words: commercial banks create money when they make loans, not governments, not treasuries, private banks. They create money from nothing and charge you interest on it. That interest is real. You pay it with real hours of your real life. But the money they lent you, it was fiction until they typed it into existence. This is the foundation of the entire system, and it only gets worse from here. The debt trap. Now here's where the scam becomes mathematical. Let's say a bank creates $1 million and lends it out at 5% interest. That means $1,050,000 needs to be paid back, but only $1 million was ever created. Where does the extra 50,000 come from? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. It was never created. The only way to pay that interest is to borrow more money, which creates more debt, which requires more interest, which requires more borrowing. It's a loop with no exit. The system mathematically guarantees that total debt will always exceed total money. This isn't a flaw. This is the architecture. The entire monetary system is a game of musical chairs where there are always fewer chairs than players. Someone must lose. Someone must go bankrupt. Someone must default. Not because they were lazy or irresponsible, but because the math demands it. If this is making your blood boil, good. Hit like and subscribe to keep exposing what they hide. Because what comes next shows you who designed this trap and why. The system needs perpetual growth to survive. The moment growth stops, the whole house of cards starts trembling. The 1913, December 23rd, 1913. Most of Congress had already left for Christmas break. And on that night, a small group of senators passed the Federal Reserve Act, handing control of America's money supply to a consortium of private bankers. Private bankers control your money. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It has no reserves. It's a privately owned central bank that has the exclusive power to create the nation's currency and loan it to the government at interest. Before 1913, America had no permanent income tax. Coincidence? The 16th Amendment, authorizing federal income tax, was ratified the same year. Give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws. The income tax was created specifically to pay the interest on the money the government would now borrow from the Federal Reserve. Before this, the government could issue its own currency debt-free. Lincoln did it with greenbacks. Kennedy attempted it with Executive Order 11110. Both were assassinated. I'm not saying there's a direct connection. I'm saying the pattern is uncomfortable. And speaking of patterns, what happened after 1913 tells you everything about who this system really serves. Inflation is theft. Since the Federal Reserve was created, the US dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power. 96%. What cost $1 in 1913 costs over $30 today. They call it inflation, as if it were some natural phenomenon like weather or gravity. It's not. Inflation is the direct, predictable result of creating more money. And who creates money? The banks. Every dollar they conjure dilutes the value of every dollar you already have. It's a hidden tax that requires no vote, no legislation, no consent. Inflation is the most regressive tax ever invented. The rich don't hold cash. They hold assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, things that rise with inflation. The middle class holds savings accounts earning 1%, while inflation runs at 5, 6, 7%. Your savings are melting. Every year you work the same hours, pay the same taxes, and somehow buy less. That's not an accident. That's wealth transfer by design. Your purchasing power is being siphoned from you, slowly enough that you don't riot, but fast enough that you never get ahead. But this leads us to something even more disturbing about who really controls the levers. Boom and bust. If banks create money through loans, what happens when they stop lending? The money supply contracts. Businesses can't get credit. People can't refinance. Defaults cascade. Markets crash. Collapse. This is the boom and bust cycle, and it's not a bug, it's a feature. During the boom, banks flood the economy with cheap credit. Asset prices soar. Everyone feels wealthy. People take on more debt. Then the central bank raises interest rates. Credit tightens. The bubble pops. And during the bust, something remarkable happens. The assets bought with borrowed. Money gets seized by the banks that created the money from nothing. Real homes, real businesses, real land, all transferred from borrowers who couldn't pay to banks who never had anything at risk. 2008 wasn't a failure of the system. It was the system working perfectly. Banks created trillions in subprime mortgages, packaged them as securities, sold them worldwide, and when it all collapsed, they got bailed out with taxpayer money. The banks were too big to fail, but the people were too small to matter. $14 trillion in household wealth was destroyed. The banks got $700 billion in bailouts, then record bonuses the following year. And what if I told you the next crash is already being engineered? Perpetual growth. Here's the part they really don't want you to think about. In a debt-based monetary system, the economy must grow forever. Not because growth is good, but because the debt demands it. Grow or die. Remember, every dollar is created with interest attached. To pay that interest, more dollars must be created, which means more loans, more consumption, more production, more extraction. Stop growing and the debt becomes unpayable, defaults spike, banks fail, the system implodes. This is why every government on earth is obsessed with GDP growth, not because it makes your life better, because the alternative is systemic collapse. Infinite growth on a finite planet is the logic of a cancer cell. We're told that economic growth lifts all boats. But after 50 years of relentless growth, the average worker's real wages have barely moved. Where did all that growth go? To the top, to the institutions that control the money supply, to the banks, the hedge funds, the corporations that sit closest to the money printer. The Cantillon effect says those who receive new money first benefit most before prices adjust. Everyone else pays the cost. But this obsession with growth connects to something even darker: the global web. This scam isn't limited to America. It's been exported to every corner of the globe. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created at Bretton Woods in 1944, ostensibly to help developing nations. In reality, they became tools of economic control. Here's the playbook. A developing nation needs infrastructure. The IMF offers loans, denominated in US dollars with strings attached. Privatize your industries, open your markets to foreign corporations, cut social spending. The country takes the loan. Foreign companies extract the resources. The profits flow out. The debt remains. When the country can't pay, the IMF restructures the debt with even harsher conditions. More privatization, more austerity, more control. They call it aid, but it functions as economic colonialism. John Perkins, a former economic hitman, wrote an entire book exposing this. His job was to saddle countries with unpayable debt so American corporations could seize their assets. We built a system where the poor countries finance the rich ones. 48 of the 50 poorest countries in the world are net creditors to the richest. They send more money north than they receive, and this global debt web is tightening. But there's a new chapter being written right now. Digital prison. Central bank digital currencies. CBDC. Every major central bank is developing one. They tell you it's about efficiency, financial inclusion, modernization, control, surveillance, compliance. That's what it's really about. A CBDC gives the central bank direct control over every transaction you make. They can see what you buy, where you buy it, and when. They can program the money itself. Expiration dates on your savings, spending limits on certain categories, negative interest rates that punish you for not spending. Total control. Think that's extreme? China's digital yuan already has programmable features. The European Central Bank has openly discussed programmability. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, published a paper calling programmable money a key advantage of CBDC. Imagine money that can be turned off if you say the wrong thing. During the Canadian trucker protests in 2022, the government froze bank accounts of protesters and their supporters without court orders. That was a preview. With CBDC, they won't need to freeze your account. They'll just deactivate your money. No cash, no alternatives, no escape. And this brings us to the question nobody in power wants you to ask. Who really rules? Follow the money long enough, and you always arrive at the same doorstep. Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. Central banks operate independently of elected governments. The Federal Reserve Chairman is not elected by the people. The European Central Bank answers to no parliament. The Bank of England has operational independence. These institutions set interest rates, control money supply, and can crash or inflate economies at will. And they answer to no one you voted for. In 2008, the Federal Reserve secretly loaned over $16 trillion to banks around the world. $16 trillion, more than the entire U.S. national debt at the time. This was only discovered through a partial audit forced by Congress. $16 trillion, secret. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street together own significant stakes in nearly every major corporation on Earth. Their executives rotate between Wall Street and government positions. Treasury secretaries come from Goldman Sachs. Fed chairs come from the banking system. The regulators and the regulated are the same people. This isn't democracy. This is a financial oligarchy wearing democratic clothing. But here's what they fear most: breaking free. They fear you understanding this. That's why none of this is taught in schools. That's why financial literacy means learning to budget, not learning how money is created. They want you focused on managing your crumbs while they control the entire bakery. The greatest prison is the one where the inmates don't know they are imprisoned. But awareness is the first step toward freedom. When you understand that money is created as debt, you start blaming yourself for struggling. When you understand inflation is a policy choice, you stop accepting it as inevitable. When you understand the boom and bust cycle is engineered, you stop being its victim. What can you do? Educate yourself on monetary history, diversify out of pure cash holdings, support movements for central bank transparency and audits. Talk about this with people you trust. Question every economic narrative you're fed. An informed population is the only real threat to a corrupt system. The system survives because of ignorance and apathy. Every person who understands how money really works is a crack in the foundation of this machine. Be that crack. So let me connect the dots. Money is created from nothing by private banks. Every dollar is born as debt with interest that was never created. This mathematically guarantees perpetual debt, perpetual growth, and perpetual wealth transfer from those who work to those who lend. The Federal Reserve, the IMF, the central banks of the world, they're not protecting you. They're farming you. You are the product. Inflation steals your savings. Boom and bust cycles steal your assets. And now, digital currencies threaten to steal your last refuge of financial privacy. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented history, published economics, and admitted policy. The proof isn't hidden. It's just ignored. It is well enough that people do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Henry Ford said that almost a century ago, and they've made sure his prediction never comes true until now. You made it this far. You now understand more about the monetary system than 99% of the population. Don't let that knowledge go to waste. If you made it to the end, comment debt is the product to prove you see through the illusion now. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about? The truth is out there. You just have to follow the money. Subscribe if you want to keep digging.